Okay, guys, let's wrap up talking about the Portuguese being in Africa and sort of what's happening. So, where we left off, we talked about the slave trade and how that was just getting started. We talked about how the Portuguese were getting slaves from some of the rival Africans. They would go out to their rivals and attack them and capture people, bring them back to the coast, and basically trade or sell those people that they'd captured to the Portuguese, who then would take them to the New World. And the main cause for that was really so that they could work on the plantations in the New World, in the Caribbean and in North America. So while all of this is happening, we're actually going to see some really crazy things that are going on in Africa in terms of the development of some massive kingdoms there. At the same time, we'll actually see that some of these villages, some of these places that had existed are going to just disappear forever because so many people had actually been kidnapped and sold into slavery that the entire villages just vanish over time. And so it's really an interesting time in history that we see that while some of these places in Africa just disappeared, some of these other ones rose up and became gigantic. So what we are looking at right here in this map is around 1700, and everything that you see shaded in this sort of orangey, salmony color, this is where the trading area was happening. So at first glance, you can see that trading for these Africans was really happening mostly along the coast. Of course, we mentioned before that the Europeans rarely went inland at all. They stayed right on the coast, so you can really see that most of this down here is right on the coast. And so that becomes very, very important. We talked about the Congo in the last video and in class. So this right here is the old Congo. Today, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is actually it's closer to the center here of Africa. So the original Congo is located over here where Alfonso was from. We are going to talk a little bit about the Asante Kingdom today. So the Asante people are right here, and it's right on the coast. It is going to become a major, major trading area. So most of these places that we're going to talk about are going to become extremely powerful because of this slave trade going on. So the really successful nations that come out of this were very active in the slave trade, and they're going to make a lot of money and become very powerful. And of course, I believe we also mentioned that weapons and gunpowder were two of the items that were traded for some of these slaves. So in these areas that were making deals with the Portuguese and later on some of the other countries who come here for the slave trade, if they made deals with them, they were well armed. So they actually gave them those weapons, and in exchange for that, they of course got the slaves. But this is going to help to make those nations inside Africa way more powerful, especially when they go out to attack their neighboring villages, because they have better weapons. We have already discussed how that made such a huge difference for the Spanish conquistadors to overtake the natives. The same thing is going to happen here, except we're going to see that some African groups are more successful in taking over the other Africans. So on this map, again, you can see where that trading area is. The outlines that you see here are actually to show where different African rulers basically were. So some of them, they've been labeled for you. You can see all along here. Here's Darfur, that's still there. Ethiopia is actually a country that encompasses this whole area right here, this kind of little point that's part of Ethiopia today. And so some of these are going to become very, very successful during this time because of that slave trade. So let's start out by talking about the Asante Kingdom. This is where we're going to have a ruler, right here. Yeah. His name is Osei Tutu. So that's how you pronounce that. Tutu is actually a common African last name, kind of like saying Smith or Jones here. So it will come up multiple times as we go through African history in here. As I mentioned, this is where Ghana, the country of Ghana, is today. And Osei Tutu is going to be the one who is there. Um, so they're going to have neighboring kingdoms that they're actually going to fight considerably with. They didn't actually put the one label it on this one, but he basically realized that if he's going to beat these neighboring countries that were pretty powerful in and of themselves, that his people needed to be united together first of all. And so he's going to work really hard to really figure out a way to make all of the people be united in the Asante Kingdom so that they have that united front to really fight against their neighbors. So we mentioned before that a really great time to attack somebody is right after they've done a civil war or gone through a civil war, like in Peru, because half of the people, even if everything's settled and you have a new ruler, a new king, new whatever, half of those people did not agree with you. And it's not like all of a sudden they'll be like, oh, it's fine now. That's not how that works. So even if they're like, okay, we have a new ruler, it doesn't mean that they have to like it. And so it would be very easy for somebody to come in and basically split that up. And so that's basically what's going to happen. Osei Tutu is he believed that he had the right to rule from heaven, like we mentioned on the notes here. So divine right to rule. We've talked about this more than once in class. Go all the way back to the pharaohs. The pharaohs believed that they were given the right to rule from Amun-Ra, the sun god. We've had other kings who told their people, like, God told me I'm supposed to be in charge of you. And how are you supposed to fight with that? It's hard. If religion is important to you, it's hard for you to argue if you believe that God gave these people the right to rule. And so Osei Tutu definitely has that going. So he is going to create a monopoly on the gold and slave trade. So basically, when you have a monopoly, it means that you control everything in one particular area. In this case, it's two separate ones, right? Gold and the slave trade. So that means that there's no competition. Nobody else is part of this. So if you think to the board game Monopoly, if you get all of the colors, all of one color, so like let's say you get all three of the pink ones, which includes St. Charles Place, if you get all three of those, you get to start building your houses and your hotels, and then when people land on them, they have to pay you more money because there's no competition. That's what's happening here. So he's actually going to be in exclusive control of the gold in this area, and there's a lot of gold in Africa, and obviously the slave trade in this area. So you can see, like, this is actually a pretty good place for them. They're not that far from Portugal, which is right here, right? It's just sailing around this little part here. And it would be easy for them to leave here to sail across the ocean to be able to get to the New World. So he primarily asked the Europeans for firearms in exchange for the slaves and the gold because he felt that that would help make him more powerful, and it kind of does against his enemies here in Africa. They also, because of this, are going to become rather wealthy, and so the Asante Kingdom becomes really, really wealthy. And then if we take one step back right here, not only will he have that monopoly and then deal with the Europeans exclusively, but he's also going to take over a lot of his neighbors. And so that allows him to grow his kingdom, and in that case, becomes more powerful. So there's going to be a couple of other big, huge kingdoms that are going to rise up instead of disappear like some of the others. Right here, we've got the Oyo Empire. That is going to be where Nigeria is today. It was a really small kingdom to start with. However, they will also use the slave trade to build up their wealth pretty impressively. Not only their wealth, but their army. And so that becomes important for them as well. So there are two examples of those African states that form and grow because of the slave trade. So let's talk about Europeans in Africa. The Portuguese are the first ones to get there. They are not going to be the last. As they are continuing to build wealth by selling slaves into the New World, other countries are going to basically be like, hey, we want in on this too. So the British, Dutch, and French are eventually going to come into Africa, and they will pick off those Portuguese forts that we talked about previously, one by one. Basically, over time, they take them over. So the Portuguese are losing that sort of empire that they had set up there in Africa. So this is the 1600s. So we're moving throughout history, as you guys can see here. And as this is happening, we will also see the first permanent European settlement in Africa. So going back to this map right here, you can see Cape Town is right here. Today, the country that is located here is actually called South Africa, which makes sense and is not creative because it's in South Africa. But Cape Town is a city that still exists, so it's down there. This is formed in 1652, and it is the first European settlement in Africa that stays there. It is not one of those little tiny forts that the Portuguese, they never intended to build up into these big cities once they set those forts up. But this city is definitely going to be a thing. So it is settled by a group of people called the Boers. That's how you write that right there. That's how you spell it. They are from the Netherlands. They are Dutch. So people who come from the Netherlands are called the Dutch. And it's actually where Dr. Pol is from, if any of you ever watch him. And so these were Dutch farmers, and they settled in South Africa, and they formed Cape Town. They formed the city there. They truly believe that Africans were inferior to them and that it was their right, because they were superior to the Africans, that they should be able to take over their land. Now, one of the reasons I want to point out to you that the Dutch here settled in the 1650s is because if you fast forward in history, the Dutch influence in South Africa actually is very heavy today. So they still, their language still has a lot of the Dutch in it. And actually, for a long time, they actually had something called the apartheid. And in South Africa, that was legal separation of blacks and whites. And so it basically was giving the whites there, who were the descendants of these Dutch farmers, they were allowed to hold all of the government offices. They had lots of rules against the Africans who lived there. In some cases, they were definitely living in just the slums, in these like pop-up cities. And sometimes they didn't have rights to vote. A lot of things. It's very similar to our civil rights issues that we had that sort of come to the forefront in the 1960s here. However, this lasted into my lifetime. So it's not until the 1990s that the apartheid is finally overthrown. So worldwide, in the 1990s, it took a push from around the world to be able to end this. And if you look back in history, it all comes back to right here. So this is one of the reasons that we study history. I know lots of kids ask, like, how am I ever going to use this in real life? Well, because it teaches you about some of the things and the reasons why problems exist. A lot of times they're deeply rooted hundreds of years previous, and this is a perfect example of that. So things have definitely changed in South Africa. I'm not sure that they are perfect yet, but there definitely has been changes, and that apartheid does not exist anymore. So they legally do not have a separation of blacks and whites in South Africa. However, I will tell you that as Africa continues to get invaded by British, Dutch, and French, they will break up Africa into different places. We'll talk about this in another chapter. And they will sort of claim new land for their home countries. And when they do that, they take some of these tribes here that are, fighting some of these African states. Some of them are still very small. Some of them are on the interior and didn't have a lot of European influence yet. They will squish them together. And in some cases, you're putting together groups of people who have hated each other and attacked each other for hundreds of years. And now all of a sudden you are squished together and you're like, hey, now you live in the same country. And not only that, you live in the same country with these people you hate, and you have a foreign power who's in charge of you. So it's not going to end well. And here in Rwanda, for example, we will see that we'll have two of those groups who hate each other into the 1990s. They will continue to have civil war there because of this. And so, really, this is bad all around. It's really not a great thing. But again, it all comes back to this idea that the Europeans thought they were better than the Africans or better than the Native Americans in the New World. And it's definitely going to impact them and how they react to things as they continue to settle in these areas.